started experiencing stress, anxiety, panic attacks, burnout. Not only in our culture, but in a lot of cultures, we don't grow up having those conversations. I remember being on my hands and knees at the reception of my work, and I was like, I cannot do this.
Hi, welcome to Changing Suits. My name's Bal.
And my name's Taj.
Just to ask the guests really quickly, do you like how quickly we went from laughing to a very serious
It's
hi?
very professional, very professional.
If we were not made to be actors and actresses, then I don't know, someone needs to be... Anyway, so let's get back to it. So welcome to another episode of Changing Suits. If you are listening on Spotify, Apple, we are still doing that. Onto YouTube, you can actually see our facial expressions, which are always a bit more with... After the last video, I've realised how expressive we are. Anyway, hi Taj, how are you?
Smiling.
Yeah.
Good. I'm good.
Good. Today's episode, we will be talking about stress and anxiety. So we've got Nav Sohanpal here, and I have said it in the Indian accent. I was going to say Nav Sohanpal. Nav is a corporate wellbeing specialist. Now, stress and anxiety is something that we all suffer from. So we have discussed this previously, but we wanted to go into this a bit more and also talk about the corporate world. So firstly, Nav, hiya, how are you? Can you introduce yourself?
So my name's Nav, which is short for Navpreet Sohanpal. I'm based in Windsor, and I still feel like I'm saying recently, it's 2 years ago that I set up my own business. It's called POP, which stands for Peace Over Panic. Then I added in the corporate wellbeing. I used to be in the legal world before, but then I started experiencing stress, anxiety, panic attacks, burnout. And then that's kind of what's got me to where I am now. So just helping other people overcome it in the same way that I have whilst working in the corporate world, and not letting it get in the way of your success as well.
Prior to getting into this realm of mental health and well-being, what was your role before? Were you within that realm, or was it just from your personal experience?
So I was in corporate governance. I worked for a Big Four. I was doing something completely different. So yeah, it is such you can't even compare the two now. It feels like two different lives with what I was doing before. And what's really interesting is in that world before, mental health wasn't a part of my life. Everyone has a mental health, of course, but when I started experiencing everything, I didn't know what anxiety was. I know people ask me what the hell, how did you not know that? I just feel like we, not only in our culture, but in a lot of cultures, we don't grow up having those conversations. So when I did start having anxiety, I couldn't even catch it at the beginning because I was disregarding it. I just thought it was me busy, just leading a really busy life, but I had no idea what it was. Yes.
What is anxiety? So we can spot it ourselves.
So for me, just how you were saying before, everyone feels stressed from time to time. In some cases, it's even of benefit to us, right? Research has proven that. So everyone feels it from time to time. We've got deadlines, we've got family life, relationships, so many different things going on. But I think anxiety happens when you stay in that period of stress for too long. That's when I think that it starts to evolve into anxiety.
On that, Nav, then what is too long?
Okay, so for me, oh God, this can really be very, very unique to each person because I think it depends on the source. So for me, my source was actually going on from when I was really young, because what I started to realize was all the values and, the traditions and just the pressures that were put on me from a very young age, not in a bad way, never blaming on anyone, just the way that we grew up. I just started to realize that I'm kind of I was on this kind of, a different wavelength, but I knew I kind of had to conform to kind of fit in. We all kind of can resonate with that universal definition of success in our community, especially for women, right? What does it mean to be a respectful, young, successul woman?
Before you go on, you've said something really interesting. It started from a young age. And obviously with the podcast, we do look at culture and, and I love the fact that you've just said, look, I'm not blaming anyone, because I think we're of the same thought of, look, our parents, our grandparents have always wanted the best. That's been a given.
100%.
We've been very lucky in that. But it's that cultural aspect. But can you explain in your own words what it is when you were younger that you think started that stress off?
So I think the biggest thing is I did not have time to be curious. I didn't have time to really discover who I actually was. And I think we felt that from a really young age. I think what's really important to note is that I have sisters. They are a bit older than me. There's 7 and 9 years age gap between us. So they were essentially my future forecast, is what I call them all the time. I was like, this is literally going to be my life.
You've just added pressure to Taj now. Being the older sister, there we are. Go on, carry on, Nav. You're saying something very interesting now.
I must achieve something now so you can follow on, Belle.
Yes.
But then the reverse is we've got to keep that up, right? Because then there's a pressure is, okay, one is smashing it, really conforming, taking all these things. The second one, and then it's like, ooh, the third one. Like, and then you're thinking, oh, like you start to feel that pressure and you start to take that on. And it's really interesting. So I think from a very young age, like I was always the one that was doing like all the extracurriculars. Like I was super creative. So I was the one that was doing like kickboxing, singing, a
So your
violin.
sisters hated you then, basically, is what you're telling us.
They were just like, you know, actually my older sister was really good. She was really supportive because I think she did start to see just like how important it was as she was entering into different phases of her life to kind of have these extra things going on, because that is what makes you a bit more like well-rounded, is just seeing all these different things rather than just being so one-dimensional. I think it's really important.
Do you think the first child, because they're almost like the guinea pig, is the one that gets the most pressure, and then when it comes down to, I don't know, second, third, fourth,
They can't be bothered with us, can they, Nav? I mean, it's by the third, it's like, give up.
Honestly, I'm just like the leftovers. That's why I always say this is the leftover child. I'm like, that's why I've got all these allergies. I'm like, you just kind of put together what you could, you know, like by the end of it.
To be fair, Nav, I don't have the allergies. You're just using that as an excuse.
Oh my God. I need to find my people. So if I'm honest, in my experience, what I found is I do think that the first child does have a lot of pressure. Like my elder sister, I kind of refer to as like my second mom, if I'm honest. And I don't know if that's because of the age gap, but she was really helpful in like guiding me. And she was really pivotal in helping to start to remold that kind of like pressure and that path a little bit as she got older. Then she kind of was like, no, you know, you need to kind of like add a little bit more. You kind of need to experience things. Because that's what I was seeing, is that everyone around me, we start to have this universal definition, don't we, of like kind of what we're all striving for. So even from when I was about 4 or 5 years old, you know, people are always asking that question. The one thing that does not bug me, but I think when we have conversations, it's never like starts off with like a how are you, like genuinely, how you doing, like what's been going on, how you feeling. It was always just like, okay, it went from what are you going to be when you're older, right? And then as you're progressing, what's the next step? And it was always just like, I started to realize it was never enough, like for other people.
I'm in the same position as the third child.
Yes.
And I felt exactly what you've had. I think I can see where the pressure for the first and even the second child. By the third, it's a case of they're still focusing on the first two. So you're good. Until they get married, you're in the sort of shadows, which I'm not complaining about. I thought it was fab.
Yes. I don't know if maybe it was the age gap then, because I think that they saw, so two sisters that are very similar, they were kind of going, they were riding that wave together, and then they were like waiting to see, like, so I definitely felt that
Same.
pressure to
that's
be
what
like,
happened with us as well, because it means so yeah, Val's living your life basically.
Yeah. We'll go for our walk in Wednesday's fine. So culturally, you were starting to feel the pressure from relatives and friends that were asking those questions.
yeah, and I'll be honest, a lot of it is how much you also put that on yourself. You can't just put it on other people. You can't just be like, they're the ones making me. I chose to take that on. Even though I was young, I chose to take that on, right? And that's one really important part when you're looking at headspace, when you're looking at anxiety, when you're looking at any part of your life, is actually people love to point the finger. And there have been people that have directly, you know, caused me like to become anxious. There are people that have done wrong, but I can't point the finger and blame, because when I'm doing that, I'm not taking responsibility. I'm not taking accountability. And then I can't change the direction that I'm going in.
Even if you do point the finger to them, are they really going to be bothered? That's the other thing as well.
No,
Are
yeah,
you achieving anything by blaming someone else? Because they might not see, it's point of view again.
yes,
They might not see that they're causing the anxiety.
yep,
They're just
100%.
being themselves. And
Yep,
it's up to you to, like you were saying, take on what you want to.
We discussed this really briefly last week, me and Taj did. And it's a case of, I don't remember a lot of things in the past.
yeah,
Whereas Taj does remember a lot. And again, she's, you know, we'll listen to Taj's story in a little while as well, but she gets really anxious. But it
mm-hmm.
sounds like it's quite similar in the fact that you took on, when your relatives and things were saying it, you
Yeah.
took that on. And maybe I just didn't notice that they were asking the questions.
It's good. It's good.
Because that's the thing as well. Do you think memory has got something to do with it as well? Because I remember so many little things,
Yeah,
and maybe that's what builds up the anxiety. Because I've had panic attacks to the point of where I've had to go to hospital for them. They've
yeah,
been that bad, and you
same,
feel
yeah.
like, oh my god, this is the end.
I'm done. Yep.
So, do you think it might be because we remember so many little nitty gritty things that makes us lead up to that panic attack?
I honestly think it's very unique. I think you always remember what it is that sticks with you, like what you resonate with. But then it's also like, how have you learned that? It's about your conditioning. Like, I feel like that word gets chucked around left, right, and center, doesn't it? But it's like, what is it that you're paying attention to. And it's also massively, like for me, I always talk about something called like your self concept versus like your social self. So I always talk about like me and how I would view myself. How do I label myself? How do I actually look at myself versus how do I want to be perceived? That was my biggest thing, right? I think that we always have those two sides to us. The goal is that you want to get them completely aligned. So even from a very young age, if you were to put me next to like, you know, other people that were my age, right, and directly compare us, I used to always think like, I'm not good enough. I've got to keep going. I've got to like uphold the reputation, what I do. I'm an extension of my family. And that was like a big thing.
So is it self-doubt? And what's the other word? I can't think of it, when you just don't think you're good enough.
Yeah. Like 100%. Like, it's just like,
Mm.
you definitely like that 100%, but by what are you measuring that against, right? Like, what is that? Like for me, it was what I saw everyone was doing around me. The biggest thing is perception. Like, that's what it is. People can be giving out whatever perception that they want. We see it left, right, and center. Like when we go to like social events, right, people normally just want to kind of give their highlights. In my experience anyways, what I found, so and so is doing this, so and so, and you're just like, oh my god, like I'm
And
not
it's the
even
same,
anywhere near that.
but it's completely true. It tends to be the same thing, especially within an Asian family. It tends to be, oh, what if they're in education? Oh, how's their education going? What are their grades like?
Yes.
Are they working? What's their job like? Oh, they're the top of the game. And then it's marriage when they're
Yes.
going to have kids.
I remember there was this, we used to go to, well, when we used to go to these family functions, there was always this one uncle, and
Uncle, not auntie.
he used to highlight how brilliantly his kids were doing.
I know
Mm.
who you're talking about as well. That's so bad.
Level, there's this, and you're like, okay, I'm never going to compare to them. I'm just rubbish. Okay, I'm just rubbish. You wouldn't say that, but you'd think, and you'd like, forget it. I'm not even going to compare myself. They're somewhere there.
Yeah, but the issue was you were going to the events. I never used to go to these events. Maybe that's where the issue is, everyone.
Yeah.
And also, were you seeing the whole picture? Because we tend not to see the whole picture. Your
No.
brain will just look for whatever evidence there is, even if 99% is great, 1% is really bad, that is what you will focus on. And so that's what you see, is that you see all the time. I started doing in the corporate world. I started presenting myself in a way that I thought that I should be, right? I thought I had to change. I wanted everyone to see me as someone that was, just like completely fitting in, and I would just climb up. The truth is that who I actually was very different to how I was portraying. And we see this happening like all the time. And so I
But
think,
can we explore that, Nav?
yes,
Because where you say what I was portraying wasn't what I was, but then we all change how we
yeah,
are.
yes.
When we work. I mean, to be fair, I think everyone's seeing,
You have a phone voice, don't you? As soon
yeah,
as
the phone voice.
you voice.
My
Yeah.
mum's is the best. Oh my god, she's like proper, like telling
Hello,
herself. You can imagine all the guardian that she's saying. She's, you're this and that, blah blah. And she's like, "Good afternoon." And I'm like, "Oh, okay."
the
Like,
bouquet residence, lady of the house, as it were.
it happens, right? Like we all kind of have this way, and especially like I will be honest, I think there's so much progression happening on this, and I'm really grateful to see it. You can't help sometimes as a woman of color to change as well when you are in that big corporate, like when you're working for like those big ones, and you're just like, there's so many people, 5,000 people in one office. How are you going to be standing out, right? And you start to see that again. What also happens is you start to, what I did definitely was I started to bring in the way that I had been brought up personally, so like be respectful, we don't speak back, we don't challenge certain things, we just kind of, I brought that into my professional life, and it didn't serve me. Like it just didn't. So there's like certain situations, right, like where you've got to kind of understand that division of like how you're showing up, and then that's when I started to realize how much I was getting into trouble, right? And that's as in like just how things were kind of like impacting me negatively.
What you've just said there, where you brought your personal don't speak up. We've actually had this discussion a few weeks ago with Rupinder call from Asian Women Mean
Yeah,
Business, and she said
yeah,
exactly the same thing you've just said.
yeah,
But how do we change that thing of, okay, that's our personal life, we don't speak up, because we don't want to go the opposite. I mean, I do think there should be a level of respect, but
always, yeah,
obviously there should not be BS going on either. Like,
yeah.
you should be able to say it when you need to say it. Of course, we all say that, except, you're with your in-laws and all of a sudden you're that hungy, but it's fine. But then going into the corporate world, we know that you can't have that. How do you make that transition, and can you make that transition?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, if you think about those values, they've been ascribed to us, right? They're those things that we've been brought up with. So the whole, stay in your lane a little bit, that kind of thing, don't speak back. those are like ascribed values. You need to actually create your own ones. And it doesn't just extend into personal, like your professional life. It should be happening with you everywhere. Like that's one thing that I've learned. So what I realized is that I wasn't aware at all of my own values. Like I actually didn't have any of my own values. And that's what I realized. So actually now I realize so many different things. Like actually I want to like have big control over my time. That was a big one. I always felt like I didn't have that. So for me, every decision that I'm ever making, anything that I'm about to do, I need to be making sure that I'm aware that I have that control over my time, that no one else is dictating that for me. Another big one that I had as well was also just like obviously authenticity, like being able to show up in the way that I want to be showing up, just like honesty, like is a really big one. So that's what I started to realize in certain situations where I felt like that isn't like really happening. I tried to take myself away from it. Non-negotiables, big one. I didn't understand that concept. I didn't have it until about 4 years ago, was actually we keep giving and giving and giving. That's what I kept finding, right? Putting in the hours, right? Going to all the different things, showing face, keeping up this appearance. What, like, you're just completely depleting yourself. So now I make sure, and even to this day, right? I make sure like I have control of my time.
Do you think that stems from our parents, because they came to this country and they would work more
Yes,
than they needed to,
yes,
and we have kind of taken that on. We will work more than we need to, and now
100%.
it's expected from us. We're getting to a realization now that the penny has dropped, is why we're pushing ourselves when other people are logging off 9 to 5, just logging off.
Yeah,
We need to learn how to
100%.
do that.
We do. And it's like, it's such an interesting one because I'm so grateful for my family. I'm so grateful for my parents because if it wasn't for them, if you think about the moves that they were making at a really young age, like my mum loves to remind me that by my age, you know, she'd had all her kids, running a household. She went and studied like after she had me. Do you know what I mean? She's
Did
doing all these
she?
things. And I'm like, all right, mum. But, you know, I am so grateful like all the time that I wouldn't even have had half the opportunities if they hadn't done what they had done, right?
But
Like,
do you think that's a tough thing? Because again, I think we are very similar in the way of thinking. However, we're well aware that some of the things that our parents were doing, for example, should we be, well, like what was said, working from 9 to 9 or
no,
whatever the time is?
yeah, I don't think we need to adopt that. Like,
But we know that. But then
yeah,
we know our parents have worked hard. It's a really interesting balance because we do appreciate what they've done, but we don't agree with what they've done either.
yes, yeah. And that's when I think you need to come in with your own. So, like, I would say up until the point where I graduated, I was very heavily influenced and guided. You know, you're kind of just like, I need to kind of go along with this. I need to keep doing that. And we're taught, aren't we, from a really young age, you know what, if you really put in the work now and you work really, really hard, like you will reap the rewards. What I found was I worked really hard. I got like harassed, like, and I got massively burnt out. Like that's what
Yeah.
happened. Yeah.
Can we explore what you meant by harassed?
Yes.
How,
So I tried to, yeah. So basically, it comes along with what I was talking about before, which was that I wasn't challenging unprofessional behavior, especially when it was coming from people within my own community. So I'm working for these big corporates,
yeah.
and the same thing happens is that you see someone from your own community that is a bit more of a senior position to you, and you're straight away, you're just like, I'm not going to challenge, I'm not going to accept myself, I
Yeah.
am not going to be questioning
It's
any of
like a
this.
level of respect, or
Yeah,
you
the
sort of
boundaries just
cross
got
boundaries. Yeah.
majorly crossed. That's what was happening. And it did evolve into something like, you know, a little bit more worse. And I'm not the only one, right? That's like experienced that. And it is happening a lot. But again, that is also because I had carried that over. So I think that change when we start to let go, I call it shredding. Like I just had to I had to get rid of all the things. Once I connected with who I actually was, that sounds so like vague, right? But like once I'd actually understood what it was that I stood for, I then had to remove everything that just wasn't in line. So like what actually happened was that I started to like basically I had one really bad panic attack. It was like 2016, but there would have been signs of that happening before. And I look back at it now and I'm like, how did I miss it? Like, how did I miss it? And then they just started to snowball. So then I started having them maybe like 3 times a day. And that went on for 4 years. Yeah. So
Can
that
I
went
ask,
on.
what were, now looking back, what were the signs that you think, oh, I should have noticed then?
Yeah, the biggest one was getting sick. I was sick all the time. Like it got to a point where we just like laugh, right? But I was like getting sick all the time because, of course, my immune system was really suppressed, and it was taking me longer and longer to get better. Emotionally, what I started to realize I was doing. Everyone always sees me as very light-hearted and very jovial and whatever, and I used to exaggerate that in front of people, and internally, it was like completely the opposite. I found I got so much more emotional. Again, we'd been brought up, like, I don't know if it's because I'm one of 3 girls and your dad just can't take seeing you get upset, but it was always like, don't cry, like, what's that going to achieve,
I
right?
used to be the crybaby, so
Cry all the time.
Yeah, like, we had to be like, zip it in. And then what I started to notice is, like, when that was happening, I was so much, like, easily triggered. I was crying, like, every day. But the biggest thing is I'm not showing anyone what's happening. So I'm having panic attacks. Remember, I'll be at my desk, start to notice, oh, something's happening, run out. Like, I still remember I was on like level 5 or 6 of my building. I'm like pressing that button. I need to get down. I don't feel like I can breathe, right? And then you're like going outside, like for air. That's what was happening, right? I'd go and have that panic attack for about 40 minutes, but they're not sure, are they? Like, they last so long. Come back. I know. And then I'd come back and I would just act like nothing had happened. Really
What
big
is a panic attack, first of all? What are the symptoms of it? What are the signs of it?
Oh
Just
my
in
God.
case anyone
Yeah.
doesn't know what a panic.
Okay. So for me, it was really interesting. Pins and needles around my mouth. So
Yeah.
weird. I used to feel like really, really tingly. Shaking. I was shaking all the time, not only in my voice, but like, like just like the tips of my fingers as well. Your chest is really tight. That was I felt like I couldn't take a deep breath for 4 years. I swear. Like, I was just like, I just couldn't get rid of it. It used to feel like there's a ton of bricks on your chest. But then also the fast heart rate, like, that was always my one. When you're having the panic attacks, sounds horrible, but you are literally thinking, I'm having a heart attack. You think you're going to die. You're like, that's just like the really big one. Dizziness. It's literally like you are starting to think that there is something so big. There is such a big threat to you right now that there's that, like, they call it like, that impending doom, that there is something really big that's about to happen. I'm at my desk. Nothing is about to happen. But because that part of our brain that like manages the whole like stress response of fight, flight, freeze, because it like hasn't evolved, like, so like we still react in the same way like as our ancestors would, which is why you always hear that thing of people thinking we still respond in that way as if you would if a tiger was like chasing you down the street. It's that like survival because it hasn't evolved. So I think that is your biggest thing, is that I used to think, there's a lot of people think all the time, they go straight to worst case scenario. It's like something really, really horrible is happening. It's that irrational, like, kind of thinking. I hate saying that because I think it seems like it invalidates what people are going through, but it is irrational because you jump straight away. So that is the experience, like, in a nutshell. And the biggest thing is people think it is all those symptoms, but actually, like, it's a thought. That's what it is that is starting it. Like, I always say the symptoms are the front end, but it's like the back end is what you need to look at.
And someone that hasn't been through it, sometimes it's really hard to explain to them because they like snap out of it, and it's not that easy. Because I remember when I was going through mine and my husband was driving me up to the hospital because I thought I was dying. I was like, oh my God, I haven't written my will for my kids. Oh my God, I haven't done this, I haven't done that. And you're thinking the end points of what's going to happen for your kids, or, this is it.
Yeah.
So that's how extreme it can get.
100%, 100%. I remember once, like, I had woken up, and so what happened is I actually ended up getting signed off from work. I had one really bad episode. I remember being on my hands and knees at the like the reception, like, of my work, and I was like, I cannot do this. Like, I was so scared to get in the lift. When I was in the lift, like, I couldn't breathe. You need to jump out. People are looking at you like, what the hell? What's she going on? Like, what is that that's happening? They have no idea. It's not a tangible thing. They can't see it, right? And so I ended up getting signed off for a year.
In regards to your work, was there something different going on with your workplace, or was it the fact that it was just an ongoing stress? What caused it?
There was a couple of things. So one, if I'm being really honest, I really believe that everyone is suited to doing so many different things. I think people are good at loads of different things. What we tend to see is that we just tend to kind of like niche down. We just tend to specialize, don't we, in what we're doing. And what I started to realize is actually, I don't think that this is, I'm okay at it. I'm doing really well because I'm doing really good at it. And from the outside, people are thinking, oh my God, she's like smashing it. And internally, I was like, this is not fulfilling me in any way. And so what I kept doing was I just kept thinking, the higher I go, the more I climb, the more I keep doing, the more I get this approval and acceptance from everyone else. How they are. They're like, oh my God, you're doing all this. And then give you that momentary hype. That is what was trying to fill that void. But it doesn't last, which is why I call it momentary hype, right? It just lasts for a little bit. that was one angle. So I think I was just burning myself out because I kept having to think, I need to keep
I
going.
was going to go there because I was just thinking for my kids, when they do something good,
Yes.
we're like, well done, well done. So we're giving them, they need our approval. Almost we're building them up for
Yeah.
some sort of mental health issue. Not that we want to, but
No.
they seek our approval and we're like, well done, well done. And then when they haven't done something good, we're like, okay, maybe next time. And they're seeing our disappointment. So
Yeah.
they're taking on what we're feeding them, basically. Like, well
100%.
done. And they're on the high.
Yes.
And we're like, okay. And then they're on the low.
Yeah.
So
100%.
it's almost like getting something back. And this is probably what you were going through.
Yeah,
As we get
definitely.
older, we still want that acceptance that we've done, that shabash, we've done
Yeah.
well.
Yep.
It carries on for the rest of our lives like that
Massively.
until we realize that we can't depend on other people to give us happiness. I
You
think that's the key
can't.
element. If we wait
Massively.
for other people's approval, that's part of the issue.
It is. It's also the thing that actually, weirdly enough, knocks your confidence the most. You
Yes.
like that is when I actually got my confidence. Like when things had gotten so bad, like I couldn't leave my house. I couldn't even shower without having my mom stand like
Wow.
outside.
Why did it get that bad?
It
Why
got
did it get to
it
that
got
point
that
where
yeah, it got that bad because I didn't speak up, because I didn't want to accept. I didn't I really had this like identity crisis because I think I was so like, no, I'm this person. This is who we are, right? Like I don't suffer with anything like this. And then because we didn't know what it was, like I don't think anyone I think has taught me like now to have these conversations. But growing up, we weren't taught to be like, look out for some signs or how are you feeling? What's going
what is
on?
mental health in those days?
I
Yeah.
couldn't catch it, right? And this isn't in our community, it's everywhere, it's widespread, right?
But can I add, and this can be slightly more controversial,
It's good.
I feel like, and I don't know if this is true, that I'm seeing the next generation is a bit less resilient. And then
Mm,
I'm finding, I mean, I'm looking at my own kids, for example, if something happens, it might affect them a bit more than it would have affected me had the same thing happened. Do you think that is on the same sort of path? I do agree we do need to talk about mental health, and that I think,
Always
platforms.
labeling things, and our kids want to have those labels, and it's almost as an excuse as well. If you label something, you're like, actually, that's what's wrong with me. Actually, that's what's wrong with me. And if we
yeah.
label something, it's almost like an easy get out as well.
Also, do you find that like, so what we tend to do is whatever we have lacked in our life, we then try to really overcompensate for it.
Oh
So
yeah.
I don't know if we're seeing that now. Oh my God, we didn't grow up these conversations. I wish someone had asked me. Are we also the ones that are doing that too much, right? To the
Well,
point.
this is what me and Bal often have because my daughter suffers with anxiety, but I think that's because she sees me suffer with anxiety. It's a knock-on effect. So I'm constantly having those mental health
Mm,
conversations with her, the well-being stuff. And Belle's like, "Are you going overboard?" And I'm like, "Am I going overboard?" And
What do you think, Nav? Where's the balance? Because it is a tough one.
yeah. Okay, so I'm not a parent, so like I'm like I wouldn't really know like how I wouldn't ever speak on like how to kind of like do that. I think the biggest thing that I would say, and I this is one thing I do say to my sisters all the time, is let them be who they are. Like literally, let them experience everything. Let's not actually put, and she does it herself. We don't put any of that like expectations or anything of that. Let's just kind of see like how they're like evolving and what they're doing. And I think it's more important just to make sure that you are just really open. It's like what's really interesting is we kind of went full circle because I then had to support my parents with their mental health journey. So we went through a really like interesting cycle. And the truth is, honestly, I don't think you need to be doing anything excessive. Like I don't think you need to be like every day. I think it's just showing that there is that space of just like, let's talk about this. I think definitely from growing up from a younger age, could we have had a little bit of that learning curve? 100%. I think our parents could have done with that learning curve, right? Everyone could have. So I think that's maybe the break that we need to now kind of like have and just talk a little bit.
So you've said now you're supporting your parents. I don't know if you want to talk about that a bit
Mm.
more. Would that be okay? Just so we
Yes.
understand, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, so like, okay, so what happened is, so I had gotten better just as COVID started. So like, all my
And then
friends were
COVID bloody started.
yes, all my friends were like, "You've just been in lockdown for years." Like they were asking me, they're like, "What do we do? Like, how do we keep ourselves sane?" And all that had happened is, like, especially like my dad, he was just really struggling, kind of just like with, a lot of people were really struggling with their health, anxiety, all that kind of stuff was happening. And he's really, it wasn't too long, it was just a span of like a week or so, but he started to get really panicky. And it was a full circle moment where he goes, "Oh my God, I get it. Like, how are you doing this?" And it's never a competition or anything, but I think because it's not a tangible concept, like they see us, don't they? They see that front end where we're like getting flustered and we seem erratic and all that stuff's happening. But finally, it sounds so bad, but he could resonate with what's going on internally. So for me, it was him, like it was talking him through it, helping him actually explain what's going on, some of the tools, the techniques, right? And it was like, it was really, really like, for me, it was sweet. For him, obviously, he didn't, like, probably didn't like it, but he got a little bit attached like to me because of that whole experience. So like we'd be up
Support.
till like we'd be up till like 2-3 in the morning. And the coolest thing was I was like sharing, the things that had helped me.
Well, it sounds like there was a bit of validation for you of actually what I'm going through, and my parents are now saying, "No, Tia, what you
Yeah.
went through, we get it."
Yeah. So they were really good because they had been with me through that whole experience. And it was really cool because I would be asleep, having a panic attack like 3 in the morning, and I'd be like, Mom, you need to come and lie with me. Mom, I can't, I'm not going to make it. So she'd come and lie with me. And you started to see that as I like started to get better, when they started to see that I was like nipping things in the bud, it wasn't like, okay, whatever. They were really seeing, they were like, you've done so well. And they would actually really reinforce that. Like I wouldn't go out anywhere. So just little things, like when I did a long walk once, my dad was like, "That's so good." My dad held my hand and he was like, I used to love going shopping. Like I'm one of 3 girls, I love shopping, right? And so when I'd gotten signed off, I just became like a shell. I was like wearing really baggy like clothes because I didn't want anything to be tight. You obviously, like, your face, like my skin was really like reactive and sensitive. All these different things can start to happen. And I just looked like, honestly, when I look back, I'm just like, it gets me a bit teary because I'm like, oh my God, like I don't even identify with who that was. And so like he actually was really helpful. I remember once he was like, "Come on," he's like, "I'm gonna take you out, we're gonna go to Bicester." I was like, "I can't do that." He literally held my hand like the whole way through. So I think actually it strengthened our relationship a lot. How you were saying the hospital, I was in and out of hospital all the time. And it was him. He really, really got that. Like he was that person right at the front, always calling everyone, like whoever we need to call, taking me in right there. And you can't see it until you're in the moment. And when you look back, you're like, oh my God, like how did we go from not even being able, at the beginning, it was like, Navi, you're being really sensitive. You're working really hard. Maybe you should break. There was a bit of conflict, which happens a lot because there's misunderstanding. They're speaking one language, I'm speaking another, right? Like they need to see what's going on. I just need to speak about it, right? But then when I actually started to show them, because I was used to run away, they started to see things that were happening. So we kind of went on this like really like incredible journey to the point now. And when it was going on with my dad, like I think it wasn't so much a validation. I think finally I thought, I can support you. Like you had no idea what to do, but you stuck it out with me and you didn't leave me, right? And it can cause so many different things. Like you really see when you go through things like this, who is there. And I tell you, my family was there for me. Like my friends, like they were all just stuck around me. They didn't leave my side and they were constantly just really like helping me get through, facing my triggers. Are you okay? I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, this is the problem with video recording, isn't it? Now you're going to see every time we're
I just
crying
keep
on
looking,
video.
I'm like, oh my God. And so when that happened, I think it wasn't so much of a finally get it. I was like, oh my God, I can be there for you now and I can
That's because
support you.
parents just want to be there and hold you, and they don't want to see their child in pain, do they?
No?
So, what are the things that you can
Yes.
do to help you with anxiety and
Yeah.
not get over it, but help you?
Yes. So I think it's twofold. So I always talk, when I talk to my clients, I'm like front end, back end, and they're like, what are you on about? So back end is where we need to do the heavy work, right? Of understanding the source. A lot of the times when we leave anxiety, just like we don't really pay attention to it. Number one, we get taught a lot, distract your mind. You never want to distract your mind. If you're just looking this way, all that's happening is that it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And it snowballs. So there's going to come to a point where you can't keep avoiding it. You can't keep looking the other way. That when you face it, it's such a big issue. And what you also start to notice is that it this is the source, and things are coming out in so many different parts of your life. So for me, I started to see, oh my God, I'm getting like panicky when I'm swimming. Okay, so that means I've got things going on with my exercise. That means maybe like health related, I've got certain things going on, right? And you start to just see that it's trickling into all these different like elements of your life. The truth is that if you just keep trying to tackle it from here, it's never going to go away. You need to actually figure out that source. So you need to understand what it is that's going on. What I started to realize was I had to ask myself really big questions. Like I have about like 100 questions that I had written down that I was asking myself. And now I go through that with my clients. So that's the back end, right? Let's actually understand what's going on. How do we look at ourselves? How have we got here, right? What are our values? What is it that I just don't resonate with? What are the changes I've got to make? How do I do that? Looking at every single segment of your life and looking at what's not aligned. That's the aim, right? We want to be getting congruence across the board. And then the front end, so actually managing those physical symptoms, breath work is the number one tool. And I have about 11 tools that I share with my clients. Every single one of them comes back to the breath, because the biggest thing is when it comes to managing anxiety, stress, is that you never want to be dependent on a person. You never want to be dependent on anything else to actually help you overcome that anxiety. Your breath is available to you 24/7. And I feel like we are inundated with so much content now around how we do breathing, and people have all these things, hold it in for like 6 and out for like 9 and back in.
And that stresses you out as well. You're like, have I
Yeah.
held it long enough?
You're like, what? An anxious brain needs something that is very simple. Like keep it as simple as you can. So equal part is great, because all you need to do for me, and you can just adjust it to your breath, for me is always like in for 4, out for 4. Into the nose for 4, back out. If you can't hold the breath for that long, make it 3. If you can do it a bit longer, like make it 5. Just keep it equal. The reason why it works, and when I'm doing it, I'm either like tapping, so like I tap my fingers. We're always going to have these, hopefully, right, that you can just like tap. You can also like see people do box breathing, but again, you're looking for something, so you kind of just want to have things that are like
What's
accessible to
box
you.
breathing? I haven't heard of that.
Yeah, so it's like, it's just looking, for example, like if you have like a picture or something, like a frame, that you just follow it in, across, back out, and
Yeah.
across. But
I'm
you
doing
might
it
not
now.
have that. Like if you're in the forest, like you might not, like if you're going for a walk, you're not going to like have that. So it's important that you always are looking just like within yourself, that you have those like capabilities. And why it's so good is that it's going to help you to calm down that breathing. It's going to help you get that regulated. But it's also training your mind to look at the present moment. It's helping you to concentrate. You're not thinking, just imagine I'm somewhere nice, just imagine I'm doing this, whatever. You're actually just like 1, 2, 3, and you're doing that. So for me, the breath work is always the one. Sensory grounding, I say this all the time. I don't know if I've made up this term or if it does actually exist, but sensory grounding is like, it works in most different ways. So one thing that people can have is that feeling of disassociation. So when you feel like completely out of your body and your mind, and you don't feel like I'm in real life, like it's the most really surreal experience. I'm so grateful I've only had it once. A lot of people have it a lot of times. There's also this thing where you can start to feel like you're not safe in your environment. So when I'd be at my office, I'd be like, I'm not safe. Even though I've been there for like 8 hours by now, I'm like, I'm not
What do
safe.
you mean? What do you mean safe? As in physically safe, or what do you mean?
Yeah, you start to fear the environment that you're in, because what's happening is that when you were having a thought about something, and then you're connecting it to where you are now, so then you're just like, wait, it's all about association. So it's like if you've had like a panic attack, let's say on the train, you're more than likely going to be like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, like I don't feel safe now
Oh,
going on
so
the
you
train.
connect the two. So like
Yeah,
whenever you're on the train,
Ah,
you have the panic attack.
yeah,
You
like
relate.
for
Okay.
me, I had it in one corner of my room, a really, really bad panic attack. And I had to go to the hospital. And then when I had come back, I couldn't go into my room. I was like, I can't go. It's not safe. I did not sleep in that room for a week. And we had to end up like painting the walls a different color, like
Oh
making it
God,
almost
so
like it
you
was
had
a
to go
new
to that
space.
extreme to
Yeah.
kind of deal with it.
Yeah, that's so those are some of the things that can start to happen, right? Is that if suddenly you take it away from what it is, which is just this neutral place, it's just your room, and you attach, right, these experiences that have happened.
Is
So
it
that's,
it's almost you're like blaming some, like putting the blame on something else
ah.
rather than what is in your mind.
you
You're blaming
can
it on the
do.
environment.
It's just like it's just when something has been so significant, what starts to happen is you try to go into protective mode. So like for me, I would never want to go to like really loud sensory overload like kind of places. So like I was out all the time, right? And then I wouldn't want to go to like a bar, because I'd be like, that is going to get me, like that is going to trigger me. So
Yeah.
I started to avoid those
I
places.
don't like sitting in, if there's a row, I don't like sitting in the middle, so I don't
Yes,
feel like feeling trapped. So I
yeah,
like sitting on the end so I can almost escape quickly.
Yes. Yeah. And so like it shows up in so many different ways of life, doesn't it? Like even with me, it was like swimming. I had a really bad panic attack. So then I'm like, I'm not going back there again. And it took me ages. It's all these links. Like you would have had one experience maybe where you started to feel that when you were maybe feeling a bit trapped. And then anywhere that we think that's applicable, we just want to protect ourselves, which is why we can make our world so small sometimes and why we can be quite particular about certain things. And it's not you being difficult. You're just trying to protect yourself. You think if I am in a place, if I do as much as I can to control everything, that's what we feel. We don't feel like we have control when we're anxious. Then you think, well, this is going to really minimize the chances like of something happening.
So what is sensory dissociation? I'm assuming it's trying to realize that that's not what's causing the panic attack.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So the sensory grounding, yes, is
Grounding.
really
Sorry.
good. So it's for that, and it's also for when you're thinking worst case scenario, because that's what tends to happen is we miss out the whole rational bit. So sensory grounding is really good because essentially what you do. So people would have heard of like the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique, which is like, you know, you name, and again, I'm like, that is just. When I was anxious, I'm like, I couldn't remember that. Like, I couldn't even count backwards. I'm like, what is this?
But then it's different for everyone else because I start counting backwards, probably,
Yeah.
and then I go higher if I can count easily from 10. This probably shows how backwards. From 10, if I can do it that quick, then 30, and then you're like, oh, sugar, I've forgotten that one. And then you're just
You're so
concentrating.
good. You're so good. I was like, I couldn't even begin. One thing that was really interesting, weirdly enough, was that I could do the alphabet backwards. Like that was really good. It got
That's
to
pretty good.
Yeah, I could do it so fast. Like at the beginning, because it takes so much of your energy to be like, okay. And then at one point,
I could really do it forward. I could backwards. It's impossible. Okay.
I know. I just got so quick at it. It was so interesting. So like, yeah, like that was a really interesting. That's like a good. Maybe I should share. That's a really good technique. Is when you are feeling really anxious, like try to like do it. But I really would encourage you just to try and bring yourself back into the moment. So with sensory grounding, what we do is essentially you're going to firstly start saying, what can you see, feel, and hear around you? That would always help me. There's not a specific number of times you need to just see out loud where you are. That's why I started to notice that really helped me. So I'd be just like, right, like I'm sitting in my chair. This is where I've been the whole day. I can see like outside, right? I can see the trees. I can see the neighbors. I can hear these sounds. That's one element of it. But the biggest part of what I call like verbal journaling is that you have to start saying out loud, what is happening? Why is this happening? And it sounds so simple, but all it is that if you leave this to its own control, it's a whole jumble of thoughts, right, going on, and we can't differentiate between what's most likely and what's the worst case scenario. So when you're in a situation, you start asking yourself, like, what is happening? Why is this going on? So for me, when I had to do a bit of the exposure and go back into the pool, like I used to love swimming, had a panic attack, never wanted to go. So it was about 18 months that I didn't go, went back in, and I wasn't saying anything because we're embarrassed, aren't we? We don't want to start seeing us in a different way. I go in and I'm like, screw this. I'm going right back. I can't do this. Because my head straight away had made that link. It'd gone straight to worst case scenario. It was like, this is what's going to happen. But then I just sat down, like on one of those like things where you just like chill. I sat down there and I was just like, what is this? Because we have to accept what's going on. People don't want to accept the present moment. It's too scary for them. But I had to say to myself, what's going on? I had to say to myself, I'm feeling panicky. Why? Because the last time I came here, this is what happened, right? And my brain is telling me that the same thing is going to happen, right? And I think a part of that also just gets rid and just invalidates all of those other different thoughts that are going on. So you just kind of take it step by step. So I was doing this.
Making it logical it sounds like, rather than that illogical sort of reaction.
You're just engaging that rational thinking, and that is what got me through. And then I ended up doing like 10 laps, which to some people were like, oh, nothing. But for me, after like 18 months, I was like, this is so good. And that's all I was doing the whole time, right? And also you check in with yourself, like, how am I feeling? Because we started to think, oh my God, my heart and this. Just check in with it, like see actually like how it feels. It's called like a body scan. So you would check in from like your top to your bottom. So like check in, like how's the head feeling? How's the jaw feeling, right? Like how is the chest? You work your whole way down. Tapping is also a really good one.
I've tried tapping just briefly. It's amazing.
What do you mean by tapping, going like this? Or
So I don't tap like that. I only use it because what I see is that sometimes when you're tapping, you do it like quite fast, right? And I think when you're anxious, I think for me personally, I was like, wait, this is like, it's getting me a bit like hyped up. Yeah, I was like, this is too much.
It'll make it worse.
Yeah, I was like tapping into my anxiety. Like it was just way too much. So what I started doing was I only do it over my heart. it is incredible for when you've got a really, really fast heart that you can't control. That's what I always used to have. And you take your right hand, you take it over your heart, and you mimic the heartbeat that you want. So I actually mimic really nice and slow.
I had to check which one was my right to be.
So this is what you do, right? And you just literally tap it super, super slow. And when I share this with my clients, they've got themselves down from like their heart rate being like 189, 190, whatever, right down to it being to like getting it right down to like 80. And they've done it in 5 minutes. And you just
Why
do this.
do you think that calms it down? Because you're thinking, why am I doing this?
No, I think it's actually the tapping has been connected to soothing your amygdala, which is what regulates to your like nervous, it like regulates your nervous system. So I think that's what the connection is that it really calms that down. My biggest thing is you always want to be doing exercises and techniques that are subtle. So people, that's the big thing, is they get very worried, don't they, about, I don't want to have to, they think that you take really complicated measures, and you actually don't. These are very subtle things. Like sometimes even just like rubbing, it's called like havening. It's like you rub from like the top of your legs down to your knees. So you can be on a Zoom call and no one's going to know like that you're doing this.
Well, I can see your arm, so it would be like...
Wait, one sec. Just like this. I'll do it.
A bit dodgy.
Wait, when I lift up the camera, then hopefully you can't see too much. But you kind of just want things that are...
Nav's like, oops, I've been doing this on Zoom calls. Now everyone
I'm
thinks
like,
sorry.
So you always want things that are just like very like easy to like implement. Like that's the biggest thing is, I always say it, like you want it to be simple. Like it has to, that's what your brain can handle, is simple things in that moment. There's so many more, because what I do is like I obviously share all the different ones that I've done, but I would say the breath is probably your best one, that equal part breathing. And people think, oh, that's like so easy, whatever, but in that moment it's very, very hard. So what I say is you have to do a dress rehearsal every day, and I still do this every day. Like you can't only implement techniques and tools on bad days. You have to be doing
I
it
was just
every
gonna
day.
say, yeah, because mine is I'm okay, and then all of a sudden I have the anxiety, and I'm like, where did this come from?
Yeah.
I've been fine for months,
Yep.
and then all of a sudden I'm like trying to gasp for breath.
Yeah.
It's like you're drowning, and you're trying
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
trying to breathe deeply,
Yes.
but you can't do it.
See,
Yeah.
do you know what's really interesting in regards to this whole topic? I mean, Taj will know that I went through a period where I was very, very, very stressed until I left. I sold that business. Thank God.
Yeah.
But I found just taking out my anger on my husband, poor him,
Which we don't encourage.
which we don't encourage, but it really helped me. So I wasn't using these techniques. But where you said something earlier, which was don't rely on other people being there. Don't rely on, the picture being there and things like that. That's a really, really important point. And if we do sort of practice these things when we're not stressed,
I
that
think
makes sense.
the most important thing for me that I'm taking away, don't practice them just when it's happening. Do
Yeah.
it something that you do every day as part of your routine, which I've never thought about, to
100%.
be honest.
Every day. So like, like, so some people that I work with is when they start to feel better, they stop it. And then
Yeah,
they realize a few months later, like, why has that happened?
because you're like, you're
Taking it
cured. You don't
Yeah,
need to
you're like,
do it.
I'm done. And one thing that I'm really big on is like, again, you see so many people telling you, we see on content, you see people with these like really like aesthetic morning routines. They're getting up at like
And they
4:30,
look good as well.
and
And they
it's
got
like 3 hours long.
I'm like, kids, get out!
My morning routine is not even 20 minutes because, and I do it every single day. I don't care if it's Christmas. I don't care if it's my birthday. I don't care if I'm on holiday. Like I am doing it because it has to be sustainable. And the biggest thing is don't just do things because they have been claimed to have helped. You need to see what's working. So even though I show my clients 11 techniques, I always say, we have to pick two. We have to see which are the ones that are most effective. And these are the ones that we incorporate. And it's for me. So every single morning I always say, like people are pretty sick of hearing me say this, before I face the world, I face myself every day, right? And so I always say, I get up, before my feet even touch the ground, I'm doing meditation. I'm not meditating for 30 minutes. I don't meditate for 20 minutes. The max I do is 10 minutes, right? Sometimes I follow YouTube videos. Sometimes I do calm. Sometimes I've gotten to the point now where I can do it myself. Even 3 minutes, that is all I need. And I can implement that whenever I feel a certain way because I know that it works. Then a little bit of listening to some prayers, right? A bit of breath work. Maybe I do a bit of visualization. And that doesn't take that long. And then I start, right? Because like your cortisol levels at their highest, you naturally feel more anxious in the morning. And that is your best time to implement something because it allows you to just bring everything down. And then that goes on to shape the approach that you have to the rest of the day. But also, when you are repeating things every day, not only are they becoming easier to implement, so when the tough times come, you can implement it, but it also builds up the factual representation that you are actually able to have a handle and that you can control like what's going on. So for example, like I did my first ever Bali retreat. So like I hosted my own mental health retreat
Oh my
in
God.
Bali.
I
Yeah,
must
in
admit, I saw
May.
it on your Instagram.
Did
When
you?
did you do that, Nav?
In Bali. I did it in May. And
When?
then
We
yeah,
should have done this podcast before May. I would have come. I
come,
really
I'm
want.
doing one in October. So if you
I'm
want,
going
come in.
India in October.
Oh,
But do you know
nice.
what? We're going to be talking after this anyway, so we're good. I'll know every time you're doing your future one.
Yes,
God,
yes.
sorry,
Look,
carry on.
I didn't even
Yeah.
think it was going to be like a second one. I was like, let me just see. So what happened was, this was going to be my first time traveling since everything had happened.
So
I
you
hadn't
just
even
stressed
done,
yourself out. If
no, so
not,
I hadn't even done like a trip. I hadn't even done a trip in Europe, right?
yeah.
And everyone's like, you could see my family were a bit like, oh, we wonder how she's going to be. Traveling and also going to work there, hosting these women, doing workshops every single
God,
day.
quite
And when I
deep.
tell you, I was, touch wood, I'm like tapping everything, completely fine. And I knew that I was going to be okay because for the last few years, I have been doing this, right? I don't just wait to get to this really big thing and then you start like implementing things, right? It's like, this is going to sound really bad, but it's like, this could be quite controversial, I'm about to say, but it's like people that only pray when there's something really bad that's about to happen or they're really worried. Do that every single day, right? Like if
So
you're
you're doing
leaning,
little bit by little bit. So when you get to that big hill or mountain, should I say, not hill, it's not hard to climb because you're already stepping up it slowly, slowly every day.
yeah, 100%. Like people are like, how do you know that you're going to be okay? And I'm like, I know that I'm going to be okay because I've been managing it for the last few years. Factually, I know that I put in this work every single day. And I know that I've gotten to a point where I know the things that work. So all I have to do and what I have to do is implement that, right? And I have to like just keep that going. But that is a really hard place to get to, right? Is when you know, right, I need to implement this because in the moment it's so overwhelming. But even when I was doing that retreat, I still had to look at my values. I had to look at my non-negotiables. I had my one of my non-negotiables was always making sure that I had time for myself. So I would look. You know, sometimes you feel the need to be like that pressure to feel like present all the time. If there's ever like a thing when they're doing the yoga session, I'd be like, okay, now you guys do this. I'm gonna have my own time. So I'd go and I would just chill and I'd do my own thing, right? So still keeping those values going that needs to be happening everywhere. Even in the morning, getting up, you know, for my own time, making sure that I'm still doing everything the same that I would do. This is the stuff that gets you through. People are very quick to talk about their diet, right? They're very quick to think about, oh,
Yeah.
you know, even when I'm abroad, I do this and this and this. They're very quick to think about their like routine when it comes to exercise. You have to have one for your mental health as well. It doesn't by any means mean you're dependent. It's something that you are maintaining. You have to maintain it every single day. And I think that once you start to do things like for me, like I think the best way to do things, I'm trying to think about a way that this comes out good, is that you have to do things that are like low maintenance. Like you have to make sure that things that are very
So
easy,
you do
accessible.
it every day. You don't give up. You're like, okay, I can't be bothered because it's taking too
Yeah.
long.
Yeah.
So
Like
it
my
has,
clients.
yeah, sustainable.
Yeah, they get so excited. They're like, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do this, I've got this, I'm gonna do this. And I'm there going, okay, just see how you get on, right? And then
And you're like, you ain't going to do it, mate. No, joking.
when they check in that week, because I need them to see it for themselves, right? And then it's like when I check in the week, I'm like, how's that been going? And then they're like, oh yeah, you know what? Like, didn't manage to do this. And then I'm like, right, so that means that you need to like we need to do some shredding. So it should really be like a couple of things. Everyone can do 10 minutes, right? As long as you understand why and how you're using that time. You can't just be like, oh, because journaling is meant to be really good, I'm just going to journal. What are you getting from it? Like everyone's so different. For me, I know what I get from that meditation. I know what I get from the prayers. I know what I get from that breath work. I know what I get from that visualization. So I do it because it works, right? And I don't need to be doing anything beyond that. Like just because I don't need to be putting up anything. Like whatever it is that works for you, you got to figure that out and you've got to implement it like a strategy, like how you would with your diet, right? Same thing, like with mental health.
So now, as we come to the end of this podcast, can you give us? I was wondering whether I should do 3 or 5, but it sounds like you've got so many. I'm going to stick with 5. Can you give us 5 top tips for someone? Because to be fair, from what you're saying and what Taj just said, I hadn't realised the physical and the mental impact of having a panic attack.
Yeah.
But if there is someone listening to this that is at that stage, what 5 top tips would you give them?
So this is when if they're really struggling, right?
If
Like
they
with
are really
anxiety.
struggling.
So you have to look at the back end and the front end. So I'd say first, in order to kind of like decompress everything, you need to figure out the tools that are working, and you need to give them a really good try. Like with me, if I wasn't seeing a result like immediately, I would be like, well, it doesn't work, and I'll disregard it. No, you need to really put in the work. I had to try breath work. Like maybe it took me, it's like driving a car. Like it took me maybe about 2 to 4 weeks before I could really understand how to implement it properly. So don't invalidate something. Like if a tool isn't working within a couple of days, don't invalidate it. Keep going with it. Secondly, I think a really big thing is don't try to keep up the appearances too much. That's only going to add to everything. While I was going through everything, because I still cared about everyone else and showing up in a certain way, I was so scared that my anxiety was going to get in the way of my success and get in the way of all these different things, that actually just all of that external pressure made me worse. So actually, it's time to put yourself first. I actually had to really isolate myself through this period of time. And it was the best thing that I'd ever done. I had to go away and just disconnect. I always say, sometimes you need to break into a million pieces so that you can put yourself back together in the way that's best for you. And that's exactly what I had to do, right? I let myself, I
That's a
broke.
really nice way of putting it. Yeah, no,
And I was
that's
like,
nice.
I'm going to build myself back up in the way that's best for you. 3, have an open mind. And I think you were touching on this before, was the labels. I had labeled myself as someone, it was very black and white the way that I was living. And so when someone's telling me, oh, meditation, I was like, that's kind of reserved for people that are a bit, like hippie or whatever I would say. I'm like, that I'm not into that. And I tell you now, it's a thing that I do every single day. So just because, don't get too caught up in those labels, I would say massively echoing what you were saying before, be open-minded to these other different techniques that actually do really help. 4th, there's so many. I'm like trying to think about like the best ones.
You've only got 2 more, so you've got to be.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, oh, what are the best ones to do? I would also say a really big one is don't be scared to walk away from so many things. I walked away from people that were in my life for a very long time. I walked away from a relationship that I was in for 6 years, right? Because I was like, this
That's
isn't actually
scary to do that.
working.
Yeah.
It's so scary. It really is. And I walked away from a career that I've been training up for since I was like 18 years old. And we get so scared, don't we, that like, oh my God, this is all that I've like kind of known. I can't go away from it. And actually, the way that I've nourished, the way that I've learned, the way that I've expanded everything, like it has just really been so good for me. So actually, don't be scared. Like if there are things that you're just thinking are not benefiting me, that aren't in line with what I'm kind of standing up for, you need to kind of like, you can't be scared to step away
I
from
do
it.
second that. 100%
Yeah,
agree with that.
100%.
Yeah.
Finally, I think actually a really interesting point would be the learning. Like it kind of stems on to what I said before. People think, okay, I'm in my job now, my learning's finished, because we get so scared. Like it's actually one of the things that people lack with their confidence. Don't know if it stems back to school or however we like would, define ourselves. But I have learned so many different things now. I was so bad with tech. All I used to do was like Word, right? When I was working in the corporate world. When I then actually, all this started from was a blog. That's what I learned to create, was actually a blog. I was like learning, looking at YouTube videos. Like I started doing a blog. So then it was a website. Then I did I got a scholarship to study NLP, right? Then you're building up your own business, and the amount of things that I've learned now that I would never, and they've allowed me to become such a versatile individual, right? I had just thought of myself that one stream was all I was ever going to be about. I was so scared to learn, because we get really worried when you don't know what's on the other side of something. We don't want to know. If we haven't got that guaranteed sense of like success, you'd much rather stay in your comfort zone. Be prepared to take
It
yourself out of
boxes
that.
your life up, doesn't it? And you live like that your whole life.
Massive, which is why you don't see people say all the time, oh, I want to do X, Y, and Z, but they are so scared to like move away from that then you see like they still see that you're in the same place, right? Like even 5 years later, they haven't been able to like move away from that. So actually, don't be scared to do the learning. Like I have done so many different things that I would never have thought about doing before, and I can't wait to see all the other different things that I'm going to be learning. Right? I can't wait to see what that is that comes my way. So keep learning like as you go along. So
I'll say, well done, Nav, you did 5.
Yay! Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much for your time. Not only telling us those tips, which are so important, but also sharing your experience, because I hadn't realised, like I said, how extreme it could get, but it sort of opened my eyes, and I do need to learn I need to learn a lot more about it as well, because I know I've had these conversations with Taj and I just hadn't realised how extreme it could get. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's just been so good. Like, one of my things I always try and do is, I feel like mental health is such a dense like topic that you've got to try and keep it lighthearted, which is what I try to do, and I feel like we've been able to do that here as well, just talking. Like, it's just been so
we always
much.
like having a laugh. Good.
Isn't it? Like, there's so much always going on, like wherever you can, you've just kind of got to like kind of just make it a little bit more lighthearted. So thank you so much for having me on. It's been so much fun.
That's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Follow us on Instagram and Facebook, changing_suits, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.